Today's discussion will be presented in two sessions. First up is our government perspective and then the industry analysis. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. Enjoy the discussion. And good afternoon, everybody, and good morning if you're catching us from the West Coast. Glad you're with us as we dig into what I think are going to be some of the, what really is one of the most undercovered and most important topics in the Department of Defense. Over the next hour or so, we're talking about sustainment and supply chains and logistics. The figure that gets thrown around is around 70% of a typical weapon system's total costs are in that sustainment phase after the procurement is done. And the Navy in particular has been doing a lot of work over the last 5 or so years to up its game in that area. It all falls under the umbrella of what's called the Naval Sustainment System, or NSS. And one of the most interesting aspects about it to me is it's something that spans across the Navy's entire logistics enterprise, but the individual efforts also look a little bit different across the Navy's systems commands. The thing they all have in common, though, is finding problems, fixing them, and then moving on to the next one, and hopefully boosting readiness with each one of those steps along the way. And if you've heard the get real, get better mantra that the past couple CNOs have been using, that's exactly what this is. And so we're going to hear about some of the real results that we've seen so far with the folks who've been doing the actual NSS work for 4 different Navy systems commands. With us today is Dave Hightower, Transformation and Sustainment Team Lead for NSS Aviation at Naval Air Systems Command's Naval Sustainment Group, Commander Kirk Engler, the Director of Naval Sustainment System Supply at Naval Supply Systems Command, Captain Vince Erno, the Director for Logistics Programs at Naval Information Warfare Systems Command, and Captain Bruce Riley, the Director for Industrial Supply Chain Operations at Naval Sea Systems Command. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And Mr. Hightower, I think I want to pick on you first, just for chronological reasons, if nothing else, because I think NAVAIR was in a lot of ways the first to test out the whole NSS concept. As I understand it, the tasking back in 2018 or so was to figure out how to get the mission capable rates for your F-18s from some not very good numbers to some better numbers, but walk us through that process a little bit, how NSS started for you and maybe a little bit about what you've managed to do with it.
Sure, Jared. I'm the NSSA Transformation Sustainment Team Lead for the Navy. For NAVAIR. And back in 2018, when Secretary Mattis issued a memo saying that he wanted his strike fighter aircraft at 80% mission capable readiness, the Super Hornet was at best 50% mission capable for the previous decade. And so really everyone throughout the enterprise thought that it was an impossible task. But since the memo came out, his deputy Secretary Shanahan, he had been at Boeing for previous 30 years, and he knew a lot of commercial best practices and folks that could help the Navy out. So he put a team together to go down and in and help figure out how could we get our readiness at 80%. And the first thing that they did was they figured out how many aircraft is 80%. And so the number 341, was shot across the bow, and that really became the North Star, or the goal for the entire enterprise is, hey, let's figure out what your role is, right? In enabling the warfighter to get 341 mission capable aircraft up. And so when we internally looked at all of our metrics, we were all green, right? So we had internally developed our metrics, whether I was at the time with COMFRC, we were delivering the number of aircraft that we said we were going to deliver. Nav Sup was green, right? DLA was green. We were all saying, hey, our metrics are green. But when we developed that 341, our metrics instantly became all red. And we had to do the homework on, internally within our organizations, what was our contribution to the 341? And then since we're all interrelated in the NAE, how do we partner in order to enable the 341? So they started at FRC Southwest with trying to improve component repairs. At the time, we were the primary provider of aviation components, and we had 280 line items that were contributing to aircraft down on the ramp, right? And so we went down and in and figured out, okay, what do we need? How do we partner with DLA and NAVSUP to get the piece parts that we need? And then how do we improve our own internal processes to meet the required demand and turnaround time to get those parts back on the shelf so that the warfighter could put these planes back together? And then I went to Lemoore, where we went to the depot line up there to try to figure out. It was taking us twice as long to do a depot event than what the warfighter required, right? So we figured out what that turnaround time needed to be. We figured out what was causing our inability to execute to that turnaround time. And then again, we partnered with all of the stakeholders that contribute to our ability to complete that PMI and get it out back to the warfighter. And so that expanded to each one of the stakeholders, the O level, the supply, NAVSUP, DLA, and that energy and figuring out what our contribution was and how we needed to partner with who we worked with really energized and enabled us to meet the 341 goal in 1 year.
Captain Riley, I think I want to come to you next. How similar or different does all of this look from the ship's business? I know you came into the process a little bit later than the air enterprise, but tell us what NSS looks like from NAVSEA's perspective.
Sure, Jared. So a lot of similarities based on that previous discussion, and for years, NAVSEA is the Navy's operator of the 4 public shipyards. And, for over 50 years, they've been tasked with delivering ships, submarines, aircraft carriers, associated weapon systems, and the maintenance on those to the fleet. On-time delivery of those maintenance availabilities is a big part of keeping that fleet readiness at a high number, or the number that the fleet commander wants. So we've really probably over the last decade have been focusing on improvements in production, and that's largely been based in training and trying to move new hires to the waterfront as quickly as possible. I think the NSS aviation caused to take a step back, and so really the roots of the Naval Sustainment System shipyard, or how it was grown, was kind of based in the aviation experience. And so as they really started to dig into what aviation was seeing, pulling a lot of metrics, trying to make data-driven decisions on where they were going to focus efforts. I think most of that effort was based at the headquarters level and the shipyards level. There was a quick realization that we needed more of an enterprise approach in this, and so that's necessitated out of. I mean, you take a step back and look. The maintenance of a submarine and aircraft carrier is an incredibly complex business. And so all of the tentacles that come into that, when they really peeled it back, they came up with 9 key areas that would eventually become the pillars. And then NAVSEA had established the NAVSEA Transformation Office, and those 9 pillars, which then had a 1- and 2-star flag officer appointed as that pillar lead, to drive those NSS efforts moving forward. And much as David mentioned, that's a stepping off point in the collaboration. One of those pillars is a material pillar, which is the flag lead on that was always a NAVSUP flag in our NSS construct for naval or for shipyard. So that cross-SysCom collaboration was kind of built into the system as we established it here at NAVSEA.
That's great. Captain Erno, let me come to you next. We think of the business that you're in as dealing a lot with IT, electronic warfare, cyber, not necessarily traditionally spare parts and maintenance, but I know you're involved in NSS. So tell us what that looks like from NavWar's perspective.
Yeah, thank you. So, really, NavWar is kind of a unique SysCom in that they deliver the IT and information warfare capability to the fleet, which really touches all warfare areas, right? All platforms need information warfare as a main part of their mission set to be able to, conduct coalition and naval joint exercises, et cetera. So, really, NSS Supply has really done a great job in when it comes to, increasing the focus on end-to-end supply chain visibility. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of material that is not available necessarily in the wholesale system or the retail side on board ships, et cetera. And, in increasing that material visibility, for NavWar has, allowed us to partner, with our PEOs, and also, allows for, greater visibility and material support to the weapon systems that NavWar supports, on board all these platforms.
Commander Engler, I saved you for last because I had a feeling that NavSup was going to come up in relation to how our other panelists think about NSS, and I was right. It sounds like you've got a huge role in supporting your fellow SysComs, but also some internal implications within NavSup to NSS Supply. Talk about what you've been able to do within that command over the past couple of years with NSS.
Thanks, and good afternoon. So as it has already been mentioned, NSS Supply was not the very first NSS. It was aviation first, then followed closely behind by the shipyards. And in 2020, Vice Admiral Lesher, who was VCNO at the time, saw all of the accomplishments that those two NSS arenas had produced, and looked at Rear Admiral Stamatopoulos, who was chief of the Supply Corps at the time and commander of NAVSUP, and said, "You are now designated as the end-to-end supply chain integrator for the entire Navy. Go forth and do good things." So that's how NSS Supply was born. And over the last 4 years, we've conducted over 30 initiatives looking at different areas, demand management, optimizing our working capital fund portfolio, shaping the industrial base, working with NAVSEA in that arena, optimizing organic repair, as well as increasing end-to-end velocity within the supply chain.
Let's go back to Get Real, Get Better a little bit, just to focus on Get Real. I want to talk about how you arrive at some of the targets that you shoot at through all these various initiatives. As Mr. Heinauer said, Secretary of Defense said 80% is the right number for mission capable rates for F-18s. It's relatively easy when the Secretary of Defense tells you this is the right number. But as you go through all of these initiatives, I'm curious to hear you all talk about how you arrive at what that right number is, what that right metric is, what that North Star is that you need to be aiming at. The whole aspect of everything looks green when you're measuring the wrong things is really interesting to me. So how do you figure out what you should be measuring and what those metrics are?
I'd say from the supply standpoint, since we support every warfare area, we follow the lead of the warfare commanders. So in the maritime domain, we follow SWOBOS's lead. He has set the target at 75 mission capable ships. So that is the target that supply must meet. And we found through analysis that there are several areas, not just within, the material standpoint of do you have the part on the ship when something breaks, but how supply can contribute to other areas of a ship's mission set, whether it's a training evolution that can't be completed because of a certain equipment is down, or a maintenance trip that causes the ship to be non-mission capable. There are many areas, not just can it shoot missiles or track down drones, but also can it move through the water, the propulsion systems and AC plants. Those are not typically the priority systems that you think of, but they are very necessary for the ship to get underway. So we follow the commander's lead within their domain, and without going into classified information, those are all driven by war plans.
Sure. Mr. Heinauer, looks like you wanted to weigh in.
Yes. So the approach we took was we didn't just target the strike fighters at 80%. The decision from CNAF was, hey, we want all of our type model series aircraft at 80%, and so that then drives to meet that. It requires specific drivers, right? So in order to have 80% MC, I have to have so many aircraft in reporting in order to have enough aircraft to make that number. Also, of those aircraft that are in reporting, so many can be non-mission capable for maintenance, non-mission capable for supply, and then within the outer reporting, you've got your depot PMI events, you've got in-service repairs, and you've got mods. And what those drivers do is then the stakeholders now must internally figure out, what is my contribution in order to achieve the North Star? So then they end up with their own North Stars. So, for supply, for the Super Hornet, they could have no more than, a certain number of aircraft non-mission capable for supply before they affected the fleet's ability to hit 341. The O levels, the same, right? They could only have so many aircraft in non-mission capable maintenance, which is further broken down to scheduled maintenance and unscheduled maintenance, right? So each one of those metrics now, you can start to measure their impact to meeting the North Star. And then those appropriate stakeholders can do the root cause analysis on why are they not meeting the requirement in order to achieve the North Star. And so that starts the data-driven discussions and the analysis, the root cause analysis, to understand what the root cause of their inability to achieve the requisite metric to achieve the North Star. If that makes sense.
It's a good place. It does make sense, and that's a good place to take our first break. You just heard from Dave Heinauer from Nav Air. Also with us are Commander Kirk Engler from Nav Sup, Captain Vince Erno from Nav War, and Captain Bruce Riley from Nav Sea. We'll talk more on the other side about Naval Sustainment System on Federal News Network. I'm Jared Serbu. And we're back on Federal News Network to talk more about the Naval Sustainment System. Our guests for this are Dave Heinauer with Nav Air, Commander Kirk Engler from Nav Sup, Captain Vince Erno from Nav War, and Captain Bruce Riley from Nav Sea. And for each of you, you all did a great job in the first segment talking to us a little bit about what NSS looks like from your corners of the Navy, from your individual systems commands. I'd like to talk a little bit as we start this next segment about how you work together, how you learn lessons from each other, how you collaborate across those systems commands and across the broader Navy logistics enterprise. There are certainly things that happen within individual syscoms that affect other syscoms. What are those mechanisms that you use to make sure NSS is working for the Navy as an enterprise rather than just improvement efforts within your individual commands?
I guess I'll start, Jared. So at NAVSUP, within the Naval Sustainment System supply framework, we have a drumbeat that starts with a monthly strategic sync where we bring all the key players from NAVC and the other SysComs, the PEOs, the warfare centers, and the fleet customers all together, usually virtually, but we have the Vanguard leads that are the 06 GS15 level leads for each of these initiatives. And they come together once a month to brief the status of their initiatives, the accomplishments they've made. It also gives them an opportunity to raise up barriers so that the leadership in the room and on the line can take action to remove those barriers so that we can improve readiness for the fleet. And then on a quarterly basis, that also gets briefed to the BCNO, along with the performance to plan logistics, P2P logistics, which is the get real portion of the get real, get better duality of P2P and NSS supply. So we have a regular drumbeat that includes all the leadership and keeps everyone up to date with the initiatives and their progress. Additionally, we have quarterly summits where we bring together some of those key players. Most recently on July 3rd, we got together at the Washington Naval Washington Naval Yard and brought together flag officers and senior executive leaders from NAVC, NAVSUP. We had fleet representation from ComNav Surflant. We also had representation from DASN Sustainment, or Acquisition Sustainment Navy. Ms. Plath was there. And so we really got into the discussion of end-to-end supply chain management, specifically from the beginning part, acquisition, all the way through sustainment, and came away with really 3 big ideas that the enterprise needs to really go after. And that is firming up the sustainment command and control structure. Right now, there really isn't a single accountable official within the acquisition side of the logistics supply chain. So we really need to work on that, as well as non-material solutions to our sustainment problem, or not problems, but challenges, right? Because it's not enough just to throw more parts at it, which are going to cost more money. We need to really look at reliability, obsolescence, and pre-planning in order to get to where we need to be to support 75 mission capable ships. And the last one was really getting clarity on what is most important to the fleet. We know 75 mission capable ships is the goal, but as I was talking about earlier, what are those systems that are most important to the fleet, whether it's the propulsion systems or the weapon systems? We know that there are systems which we need to focus on in order to make those ships mission capable.
Commander Engler brought up perform to plan, and I want to drill down on what some of this has done to help with planning across the Navy. Once you've started going through these NSS initiatives across your various systems commands, I imagine it's helped uncover a lot of information that wasn't transparent, that wasn't easy to get to before, and a lot of light bulbs, I'm guessing, went off in a lot of places. Just talk in whatever way makes sense within your individual commands about what having that new information does in terms of letting you plan things like maintenance availabilities or anything else.
So, no, I think we've learned a lot about planning. One of the pillars in that in the NAVSEA transformation office that was constructed under NSS Shipyard was a planning pillar. And our mind goes to we've looked at material requirements, so our mind would generally go to material requirements when we think about that. But you hit it, Jared. It's more of the entire maintenance planning. I mean, there's looks now that we're digging into this, going back across really the class maintenance plan of the ships that we're working on, looking into like those plan durations that were built into that plan, really what the durations of the maintenance periods that are being allowed, or the customer requirements that are being pushed into those availabilities. Can we meet those durations? So there really has, I think the effort as we've stepped back and got into this, there's really been more of a focus on that planning side, and moving our readiness efforts forward through better and more predictive planning of how we execute these availabilities.
Yeah, and just to dovetail on those comments, certainly on the surface side, with looking at the non-mission capable ship diagnostic kind of wave effort, and trying to improve system readiness right through the detailed analysis of those readiness degraders has really paid large dividends. As we look at allowance management, right, making sure that we have the right parts on the ship, that are made up of the co-sal on board. Really the overall goal is to increase operational availability of weapon systems. And so, from a NAVWAR standpoint and from a surface standpoint, certainly, partnering with the PEOs and information warfare, right, and the ships to analyze the systems and take a look, at where the largest opportunity to improve operational availability exists, right, and then working to improve that fleet readiness by increasing, as I mentioned before, the visibility of the parts that are resident within NAVWAR, within our ISCAs, et cetera, that potentially NAVSUP and their wholesale system, and certainly, the retail system on board the ships and within the co-sals, making sure that end-to-end visibility is captured, will pay big dividends, reduce potential procurements, and certainly lead to cost avoidance in being 100%, material ready for issue when the warfighter needs it in a contested logistics type of environment.
I was just going to add that we learned a lot, as Captain Riley was saying, from the NSS shipyard initiatives. Unfortunately, most of those, they focused on the 4 public shipyards. And what they did was analyze each of the maintenance availability types. So there's different types based on what kind of availability they are. And what they did was they found what are the similarities and the standards, and we were able to plan toward the standard with the goal of having material available at the start of the maintenance availability, not being ordered after the start, but already on the pier, if you will, at the start of the availability. The challenge that we have in the maritime ship domain is that we have a lot of private shipyards, which we're going to have to work through that challenge of planning with the contracted shipyard in order to have the same results.
And I was actually going to ask a question kind of in the other direction, which is really for any of you, as you've designed some of these individual initiatives to get better, what have you been able to take from private industry and industry best practices who, who may do similar work in similar areas to what you're doing within your commands?
Yeah, Jared, I'll chime in there. I mean, when we first started and brought, commercial industry, into our business, a lot of us didn't know what the possibility could be, what right really looked like, right? And from a MRO, so they brought in the maintenance operations center concept with the aircraft on ground, which we stood up at sea now, which really concentrates on expediting down aircraft and getting them back into the fight. We had no idea about that concept, and so that simple concept has increased our readiness exponentially. I mean, being able to manage the resources required to get a collective number of aircraft up has really provided significant readiness increase. On the depot side, we were interested in throughput, but not really necessary turnaround time, which is, from a commercial best practice perspective, their MROs are all about turnaround time. The commercial airlines need X number of, 98% of their aircraft up in order to meet the commercial requirements. And so their depot requirements required a finite specific turnaround time. So that changed the organic depot's mindset on, hey, turnaround time is king, where before it was just the number of widgets that we could get through the system.
To add on to that, that was key to the 341, was putting in contractual language to drive industry standards into the repair cycle. So the turnaround time was driven by contractual language that we used based on industry best standards. So that was key to getting parts through the system faster. But then also, the fleet readiness centers, where our organic repair processes reside, they were not necessarily focused on max capacity. So we utilize best industry standards to maximize capacity throughput within our own organic repair facilities.
And just to stick with a slightly different aspect of the industry piece of this, I imagine a lot of your industry suppliers, other vendors, other industry partners have been used to the way that you've been doing business for many, many years before NSS. And I'm just curious, and anything jump out to you in terms of ways that all of these initiatives that you're doing have impacted your relationships with industry? What ways industry has needed to come along with you or teach you as you've have gone down this path? Anything that's changed in terms of your, again, relationship with the supplier base as you've gone through this?
So I'm gonna go back and add an additional comment, Jared, on the previous. I don't want to lose that. I think we've done some learning in that NSS shipyard side. We've done some studying and interaction with Toyota and the Toyota production system, and then as well as some benchmarking and looks at Carnival Cruise Line. And I think this goes back to my planning comment. What we're learning from those industries, or benchmarking on them, is the preparedness to do work, and it's starting ready work, i.e. having your contingencies. When you take a component off a ship to do an open and inspect type maintenance action on it, you should be prepared for all the contingencies that may come from that inspection. Or if you're not, you're going to increase your turnaround time. So that's some of what we're gleaning from this, from those other industry best practices. I think from the other side of your question on how different engagement or what we're learning is, I think we're recognizing more of industrial-based capability. I think there's more targeted action and discussion right now with industry partners on the balancing act between sustainment and new construction. And I think we're actively going out now and talking to that vendor base about that balance, where before maybe there was a definite split between the acquisition, new construction, and the sustainment requirements they were seeing.
Before we have to go to our next break, I want to talk a bit about what you're doing to make sure that all the improvements that you're making are sustainable. It sounds like a lot of initiatives going on in sort of waves, sometimes all at once. The goal being to get a little bit better, figure out where the maintenance integrators are, and solve them. How do you make sure that every improvement that you make, stands the test of time, rather than just increasing a particular availability rate for one type model series for 1 year and then moving on to the next shiny object? How do you inculcate these processes that you're building into, I guess, the culture of each one of your organizations?
Yeah, so certainly, from NavWar's perspective, these process improvements that NSS is driving, across the enterprise, are increasingly being codified in updated instructions, and also is changing the way the PEOs, or program executive offices, ISCAs, et cetera, do business. And it's really the data-driven analysis, right, that is utilizing the get real, get better type of analysis tools is driving change. It's a paradigm shift right across the enterprise, if you will, to a more efficient, more effective way of doing business when it comes to logistics as a whole, and supportability when it comes to new weapon systems, et cetera. So as we field new weapon systems, as we modernize the weapon systems that are out there, we're inculcating these NSS supply initiatives into the business processes that go along with the not only identifying, developing, deploying, right, and then sustaining those weapon systems for the fleet.
A lot of times our initiatives start with a pilot. So, we've identified a problem, we understand the current state and where we need to be, track the metrics to get there. But it really starts small, because it's an agile framework. So, if we start down one path and realize that we're not seeing any improvement, or it's not worth the squeeze, then we can easily pivot to something else. But it starts small, and then once we've decided, yes, we've gotten to where we want to be, there's always a rigor test, which looks at, I think Captain Riley brought it up, Captain Erno brought up codification of the process into policy, and that really then allows that pilot to be expanded across the enterprise.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in and add to what Commander just said. We conducted many sprints. I think at the end of those sprints, the sprint lead came, or the initiative lead would come with a scaling plan, and then a change management plan to go with it. I think, from that, as our enterprise across the naval shipyards is 37,000-ish employees. That change is a big movement. So sprint, easy to conduct in your limited controlled environment. Scaling that is a bit different. So I think we've learned through this also that so first, not every sprint was successful. ones that were not all necessarily scalable to the enterprise level. And we had to learn that. And so really then it's a decision points of which one we're going to push forward with that change management plan, get into policy and codify as we push them out.
All right, we do need to take one more break here. We will come back and have some final thoughts on improving the naval sustainment enterprise with our guests, Dave Heinauer from NavAir, Commander Kirk Engler from NavSup, Captain Vince Erno from NavWar, and Captain Bruce Riley from NavSea. Back in just a minute on Federal News Network. I'm Jared Serbu. Back on Federal News Network, in just a few minutes left to wrap up our discussion on improving the naval sustainment enterprise via the Naval Sustainment System. Our guests for this are Dave Heinauer from NavAir, Commander Kirk Engler from NavSup, Captain Vince Erno from NavWar, and Captain Bruce Riley from NavSea. I want to make sure before we run out of time here that each of you gets to talk about a little bit of the specifics of what you've actually been able to achieve through your NSS initiatives. I know there are specific metrics, not only that you're tracking and shooting toward as you establish those North Stars, but you've also each had some achievements there. I don't know, Commander Engler, maybe I'll start with you. Talk about what NavSup has been able to achieve, maybe just some of the highlights as you've worked on these individual initiatives.
Right. So as I mentioned early on, NavSup and the end-to-end supply chain really, it overlaps every single warfare area. So, NavSup had a definite hand in supporting and meeting the aviation goal of 341 Super Hornets. In the submarine area, we have gotten to 100% material availability at the start of shipyard avail for the submarines, with the goal of getting to 80% fast attack submarine availability, operational availability at any given time. We haven't gotten to 80% yet, but we are on track. Improved now to 67% availability, I think was the last number I saw. When we first started NSS Supply, it was really focused on capturing cost savings and cost avoidance. So I can talk, some of those numbers. Specifically, we improved our cash balance within the Navy Working Capital Fund by over $2 billion. We were able to avoid costs by improving repair turnaround time within aviation and maritime by close to $100 million. And within fleet readiness value, meaning how do you put a value on having a ship mission capable and not still stuck in a maintenance availability for longer than it was intended. We kind of put a value on that of up to $700 million from days of maintenance delay being reduced. So some pretty significant numbers. I think, those are great, but really what NSS Supply has done, I think, that's much more significant than those dollar values is it has really opened the conversation of sustainment and readiness across syscoms. It's gotten everybody talking the same sheet of music. And so I find that the most encouraging thing, because these are really big problems, that no one syscom can tackle on its own. So that's really the accomplishment that I'd highlight.
Yeah, I can tag on to Kurt's comments, and he hit a lot of the numbers. I think as we look at that, 80% SSN goal, the NAVSEA, our biggest lever or contribution to that is the reduction of days of maintenance delay. And so, Commander hit some of the numbers associated with that. That's based on I think the cost of the hull over their operational period is how they come up with those operational numbers that we're returning back. But it's been he's right. It's been the initiatives and driving the learning across the syscoms and the collaboration there. I think a couple of the initiatives I've worked on, I would say were successes. As I look back at them, I realized that I may have actually been a vanguard in an NSS initiative that had a shipyard outcome. So it was a NAVC benefit, and we were working it under an NSS supply initiative. So it really has that cross collaboration has been there. The outcomes have been driving towards the common goals that are nested in those driver trees, and the ultimate readiness outcomes that we're all pushing for.
Yeah, just to dovetail in on that, I mean, on the surface side of the house, certainly with the 29 critical weapon systems that have been identified, NSS Supply has done a great job when it comes to identifying those specific readiness degraders. And really it's a multi-year journey, right, to transform the end-to-end supply chain and provide really the sustainment outcomes that the fleet's looking for. And and NSS Supply, structured by, right, we talked about get better analysis, elevating the issues and barriers to senior leadership, so we can get past some of those issues and really secure the resources, right, and get on a better path. I would say that days of maintenance delay that everybody's kind of talked about is probably one of the common themes across the enterprise when we talk about NSS Supply and what it's doing for at least the surface ships. The SWO boss, Vice Admiral McLean, one of his big priorities, actually his number one priority, is reducing days of maintenance delay. And that is in direct support of getting to the North Star of 75 mission capable ships and making sure that we have enough players on the field. So every day that a ship is stuck in the shipyard past its planned completion date takes away from that North Star number. And so NSS is, by helping to make sure that we have 100% of the material on hand at the start of the availabilities, right, limiting growth work, et cetera, will help get those ships out of maintenance on time and ultimately assist in getting to the North Star.
I'm so glad you brought up the senior leader point, because that came up earlier and it's something I wanted to kind of come back to. I know there are a lot of senior flag officers who are not just aware of NSS, but pretty deeply involved in helping to guide it. A couple of you have brought up the need for barrier removal as one of the key roles for those senior leaders. Can anybody help illustrate like what that looks like? What are the kinds of situations where you get in where you do need that senior leader involvement to come in and make things work?
Yeah, so I think we've built into our construct of NSS, we've built this mindset of fix or elevate. And so it really starts from the deck plate level, and we have built in at the deck plate, our supervisors are expected to give their personnel the tools, material, paper, whatever they need to execute their jobs. And if that's not happening, there's an elevation process. And so that elevation process continues up through the shipyard commanders, through people like me at the headquarters, to the flags. And then eventually, if we're crossing like our flag's capability to other syscoms or other agencies, that we'll reach out and start that discussion to move those barriers at that flag level. And I think it's really driven improved communication and the ability to elevate those issues. It's streamlined it in this mindset, because before, I think we would maybe let those things simmer at and maybe below the deck plate level until they were noticed as an issue. Vice now they're being elevated for resolution more quickly.
Yeah, Jared, I'd like to build on that.
Please.
So I think we've had decades of a culture of handle it at the lowest level, and in that culture of handling it at the lowest level usually ended up where the problem became so dramatic that it now required flag intervention. And so with the governance structure that we have set up through NSS, we're giving the opportunity to elevate the problems at the right level, but we're having frequent enough HUDs and governance structure meetings that those barriers are now elevating up higher and higher more quickly to when they do get to the flag, it is not in a dire strait anymore. It is, hey, we see this on the horizon. We need your help. And so we can help, try to get ahead of it. Granted, we still need some help with some monumental things that are hurting our head. But I think with the governance structure, we're being more proactive about the help we need than traditionally how reactive. And I also wanted to build on, what NSS has done for us, right? There's two big things in my mind. One, it's really taught us how to work together as an NAE. But before NSS, we were working within our own silos, trying to improve our own individual businesses. And we were pointing at each other saying, from a maintainer perspective, I could get the MC you needed if supply would just give me my parts. And supply would say, I could get you your parts if you could just repair the parts faster, right? And, engineering, if we could just get this tech data faster, we could do this and that. And so it was a culture of pointing our fingers. And so the last 5 years, we've been working together and we've learned how to work together. And we have learned through the entire evolution of this, right? So it was all about MCAR, right? But then we found out, hey, certain communities really need full mission capable systems in order to execute their mission. So, I can't just have 35 E2s mission capable. I need 22 full mission capable E2s in order for the warfighter to be able to execute his mission. And so through that learning evolution, it is now shaping and us working together. Now we can work together to get the warfighter what they need in order to execute their mission.
I want to give a big thanks to each of our guests who joined us for this. We were joined by Commander Kirk Engler from Nav Sup, Captain Vince Erno from Nav War, Dave Heinauer from Nav Air, and Captain Bruce Riley from Nav Sea. I'm Jared Serbu. Thanks for joining us to learn about the Naval Sustainment System on Federal News Radio. So long. And welcome back. And in this part of the program, we're going to get a bit of an industry perspective on all the issues that we've been talking about and thinking about with the Navy. And our guest for this part of the show is Percy Alexander, the Director of Logistics and Enterprise Integration at RLO2. And Percy, I want to broaden out this conversation a little bit. We just got a lot of detail from the Navy on what exactly they're doing in the logistics space to get real, get better. How different or similar are the other services and defense agencies as you look across the rest of the DoD enterprise as far as the focus that they're putting on this sort of logistics improvement effort?
Thanks, Jared. That's a great question. And DoD in general, just as the Navy is very much focused right now on improving combat readiness, and that's through the sustainment network in each of the services that we prospered through. And for the Navy, like what the commanders were saying about the different NAVSUP and air emergencies and protocols they were doing. And what we're doing now inside the Army as well is all related to, again, improving readiness as we move into a new age of automation and modernization against a near-peer competitor for us.
So any particular examples come to mind as far as what's happening in the other services that are similar to the level of detail and rigor that the Navy's been putting into this?
Exactly, Jared. So again, with the Army, first I'll mention in the Navy, as RLO2, we participated recently for the last 3 years in the Navy's Warehouse of the Future, and that was connected to their 5G network prototype project. So there in Coronado and San Diego, we went into the warehouse, outfitted it with RFID. We brought in some automation, some storage containers, and a lot of handheld devices to improve their turnaround and their cycling times, and then the delivery from the customer to request to shorten it to make sure that those mechanics for those aviation parts had the equipment they needed on hand to fulfill those critical mission functions. The Army is doing the same thing. So for the Army, one thing is key for us is asset visibility of our equipment. And there's a congressional mandate to make sure that we have an unqualified, which is a clear audit. And to have that, we need to make sure we know where everything is at the right time and right place. So right now, RFID is coming back into vogue, looking at outfitting warehouses with that in order to track those assets, and also do it on a mobile device where we can track those assets as we walk through motor pools and airfields to make sure we have an account of all of our assets. And again, this is all going back to improving readiness to make sure that we can do that end-to-end supply chain management. So starting from the industrial base. So as the industrial organic base is being modernized, creating better facilities, new facilities, and bringing automation there, again, it works there for the mechanic in the depot, working their processes, being able to look at and see where their supply parts are as they repair those vehicles and aircraft and submarines and put them back into the fight. So it goes from the industrial base, as we have a great supply chain, to include transportation. So we can tag those assets through transportation to give us visibility. It all goes back to improving what we do to leverage and manage what we stock. And then from the supply chain into the warehouse, just mentioned the Navy's warehouse of the future. The Army is doing it also. And we're working projects now where they're going into bringing in AI solutions where we can optimize that warehouse, looking at space. How close should you move parts to the front door? How do you establish your bays? How do you set up so that the aisles are optimal for pick, pull, and store and pushing those through? So the Army, Air Force, Navy, and the other services are really honed into making sure that we can improve readiness by bringing in automation, modernizing our warehouses, and watching that supply chain from end to end. And not just there at the warehouse. Again, it goes back to that last tactical mile from the factory to the foxhole, as we like to say. So how do we get that material with pure visibility from the factory at our production and manufacturing level, move it through the supply chain and get it to that mechanic or that soldier, sailor, or airman that needs it on the battlefield, that last tactical mile. And a lot of that is automation. So all the services are coming together to look at that and make sure that we can track those and improve readiness.
And it seems like that is the common thread, right? When you look across the services, is that focus on readiness and this recognition that logistics and supply chain are key contributors to military readiness. That brings us to contested logistics, I think, right? Which is a big topic of discussion around the Defense Department right now, as you mentioned, preparing to potentially go up against a near-peer competitor. How does the contested logistics discussion affect all of this?
Very key, as again, we're under the impression and on the assumption, and we have in the past been able to project our power into any battlefield in a secure location, and then push those commodities from our storage locations throughout the fight and our lines of communication, our locks, across the battlefield. And we still will be able to do that, but it won't be as easy as before as we did it against non-state actors or against lesser opponents. So right now, going up against a near-peer competitor, it's going to be a lot harder than it was in the past to do that logistics. And they're going to contest it all the way through, from landing on shore into their area of operation to pushing it to the front line of the battlefield. Now, I mentioned before that we have control over air, land, and sea. Another area that's come into vogue now is cyber. So these near-peer competitors will try to interdict our cyber and signals, our digital signal. At that time, we have to either go silent or they would disrupt our satellites. We just experienced a outage in the real world time with the blue screen of death. We can't have that happen on the battlefield. So we have critical mission functions we need to continue to operate, whether we're connected to the server or not. Now, this may be precipitated by a commander who says, hey, we need to go silent on a digital signature for 7 days based on operations, or the enemy may interdict our satellite or our server. So how do we continue operations in a disconnected mode? The Army is working on that right now to make sure we have the right software that can take those transactions that we normally do connected to a server or on-prem and push them to the device where that soldier, sailor, airman can operate inside the battlefield, not connected, and continue those functions for a number of days. Now, when service is rejoined and set up, those devices will sync back to the server on-prem or on the cloud to make sure that there's no gap or error in the transactions that were conducted offline to those that are conducted online. So that synchronization is key, critical in disconnected operations to keep us on the battlefield, regardless of the domain we're in, whether it's air, land, or sea, or cyber or space, so we can compete against those near-peer competitors.
And that actually brings up an interesting point, which is a lot of the solutions that DoD is bringing to bear and that you're helping them bring to bear are commercial solutions, lessons learned from the commercial world. I would guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of the traditional logistics technology providers that serve U.S. businesses are not necessarily used to operating in a DDIL environment. So figuring that out in a contested logistics space, is that mostly on the Defense Department to adapt those commercial solutions to that environment, or does industry play a role also there in helping that along?
That's a great point, Jared. And we're trying to do both now. So right now, the department has told all leaders in their areas for logistics to seek industry for those solutions, to ask them, let's come to bear, let's talk together, show us what you have, those COTS items, commercial off the shelf that work. And then DoD will go through their .mil PF. That's a process where they examine processes to see if it's against doctrine or organization, and then adapt those processes. We want to be as commercial as possible and military only when necessary in order to leverage those new things that are coming out from industry at the time for advancement. And so as we take that on the defense side, we need to make sure that they adapt our commercial products and then either make changes to those or have industry work to make that. A good example of that is data security. So Walmart and other things will need to have data pushed from products where they scan those into their system. They're not that concerned about the data. If you know you have so many items in a warehouse or in a particular store, that's not that advantageous to another enemy or to another competitor. But for the Army, our data, once it's configured together and consolidated, if an enemy cannot get into our system, they may want to try to disrupt the data and the flow that we do to push forward and take that information themselves, do their own assessment, and then try to disrupt our lines of communications or how we move commodities about the battlefield. So we understand that our system is secure, but how we ingest that data is going to be a thing we continue to work on to make sure we harden those devices, we harden the software that's pushed those devices to make it come through. So right now, the Army has what's called Zero Trust Architecture, ZTA. So it challenges anything that comes into the system to validate that by credentials. So as we harden those devices, as we make sure our software works, then how we ingest data into a system that is secure, and we've proven that, we like hack the ERP. So our systems are secure 99.9% of the time, and they haven't gone down from disruption over any great length of time. So again, our goal is to make sure our devices and how we ingest data works. And another thing about ingesting data and automation, we're moving to IoT where we can put sensors, the Internet of Things. We can put sensors on our fuel, sensors on our ammo, sensors on our parts, so that we know down to the tank inside of a Stryker how much fuel is on the battlefield. We know how many rounds we fired from the individual weapon system, and then collectively, so that our commanders and staff can start making those decisions right away based on their data. And you trust your data once you verified it without waiting for a formal request to come from the unit to start their resupply. The key is to move our commodities from a reserve into the main fight based on our status of those commodities on the ground at that time. And the best way to do that is automation.
I want to pull on the security thread just a little bit more before we run out of time. Walmart, to go back to your example, obviously cares to some degree about data security. They may not care about it in all different phases of its life cycle in the exact same way DoD does. But what are the key differences there between commercial and DoD as far as data security, and what are the implications of that for somebody who's trying to develop a solution for the military?
Great. So Walmart is a great example because they had a requirement for vendors. If you want to do business with us, we need you to tag your items with RFID tags, and it becomes a cost of doing business for them. So DoD can incorporate that same kind of requirement. I mean, DoD is a great place for vendors to procure and work with. So if you set the requirement for vendors who want to do business with DoD for them to RFID tag their equipment and their repair parts that come into the system, that's going to set up for us then to be able to ingest those already RFID tagged items and put them into our supply chain. Now, the part that comes with security is, again, DoD wants to make sure that any device that comes into the network is secure. Also, the information that comes in is secure. Now, we can't encrypt that information, so a decision needs to be made on requiring the vendor to encrypt it as they push it to us, or we get it at a certain point and encrypt those tags that go into the system. So the question of the difference between commercial and DoD is a lot stringent on our side. It comes to a matter of life and death for us if we know where or when commodities are going to be on the battlefield, and the enemy wants to know the information so they can adjust and disrupt us. So that's the difference, Jared.
Last 2 minutes here. I want to just ask you broadly, as you look across this entire logistics and supply chain space that DoD is operating in, it seems like they're listening a lot right now. They're thinking a lot about how to improve. What to you are the biggest opportunities for improvement as they, again, try to bring in more commercial solutions here?
I think they're on the right track. The mantra of commercial as possible and military as necessary definitely helps us as we work together with industry to make sure that we're synced. I think in the end, visibility is key. DoD needs to ensure they're working that visibility at the industrial base, throughout the supply chain, to include transportation into those warehouses, and then down to that final tactical mile with the user. So our users need to be familiar with industry and familiar with automation and our devices. And we need to make those devices and software compatible to the user, give them a great user experience, make it easy to operate, make sure that their processes that they do from a desktop inside of SAP, which is our normal ERP platform, that anything we push to the edge is very similar, doesn't cause any disruption, and is very intuitive. So that end-to-end processing, tracking from the industrial base to the soldier, I think is where DoD needs to make sure they're tracking and including automation the full way through.
All right, we do need to leave it there for time, but I want to thank you, Percy, for taking time for this and bringing that industry perspective and broader perspective with the rest of the military services. I want to thank our guest for joining us today, Percy Alexander, Director of Logistics and Enterprise Integration at RLO2, also a certified Zebra reseller and partner. I'm Jared Serbu. You're watching Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Zebra Technologies. On behalf of Federal News Network, thanks for joining us. A link to the archived session will be available shortly. This concludes our discussion. Thanks again.